having the city with engagement on this project, and I'm going to hand it over to Councilmember G to welcome us.
Thank you, Violetta. Everyone can take a seat for a minute. We're going to make sure if we need to bring in more chairs or anything, grab a seat, or if you like standing, that's okay too. Just want to make sure everyone's comfortable because there'll be a presentation part, and hopefully there'll be a stretching part. So. Well, again, thank you. Good evening. And thank you to everybody online for joining us. This is a hybrid meeting, both in person and online. Thank you for coming out to learn about sea level rise protection here at Redwood Shores. One of the unique things is that when you look at Redwood Shores and Redwood City, we have the most bayfront of all the cities around the bay. And this is a big effort. We're not just looking at Redwood Shores alone, we're looking at an entire connection of cities and communities where sea level rise will affect us. But here in Redwood Shores, it's very important. I mean, how many of you were here when we last raised the levees? We did raise the levees. We raised it in about 2008-ish, 9-ish. And at that time, the levees had asphalt on top. And now they don't, because we knew then that sea level rise was very real and that we would have to raise the levees again at some time in the future. And we followed all the rules, and then the rules changed on us. And that's why we're in the seclusion zone right now, or in seclusion, because we followed all the FEMA rules before they changed. But it's great that you're here. It's great for those that are online joining us to learn more about what we're going to do next. And this isn't the only opportunity. Over the next 10 days, you'll have 2 more opportunities at the RSCA annual meeting next Wednesday, and then another meeting on, I think it's Saturday, February 7th. That's Saturday. So if you didn't get all you wanted today, or you had follow-up questions, you'll have 2 other chances in the next few days. So again, thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you for joining us online. And I'd like to introduce our new city manager, Patrick Heisinger. Patrick, come on up.
Thank you, Councilmember G. Good evening, everybody. My name is Patrick Heisinger. I'm your city manager. It's great to be out in your neighborhood. For those who don't know, I have been with the great city of Redwood City for 3 years, but I've been in this role for about 30 days. So I've expanded my role, and but I've been working closely with the engineering team and public works team for a while on certain aspects. So before I turn it over, I always like to kind of get a sense of folks that are in the room. So raise your hand if you're from the Shores area. Thanks. Oh, great. What about online? Can folks online just put up their hands and get a rough estimate? Just very curious. Yeah. So it seems like it's majority of Shores residents. That's great. Making sure nobody's going to bomb the meeting. I'm just kidding. So everybody's welcome. But no, again, thank you. I'm proud to serve the residents and the great city council here in Redwood City. Before I turn it over to Paige, I did want to just acknowledge other city staff. So if you're a city staff member, please raise your hand. Really appreciate all your efforts. I mean, everybody knows TK, you got Adrian, a lot goes into this. And they have a lot of staff, that work with them as well. So I think throughout the night, you'll probably meet some other folks, but definitely at the meeting on the 4th. But yeah, encourage everybody to get involved and provide some recommendations. Look forward to hearing from you. And with that, I will turn it over to Paige Saber and take it from that. Thank you.
All right, thank you guys so much for being here tonight. We're really excited to speak to you about this important project for Redwood Shores and the Greater Peninsula region. As Patrick said, I'm Paige Saber. I'm a senior engineer in the engineering and transportation team at Redwood City. I am here in partnership with my consultant team that's led by Schaff and Miller Consultant Civil Engineers. They bring experts in landscape architecture, community engagement, environmental compliance, and geotechnical engineering. They'll be introducing themselves as they present the different topics, and you'll get a chance to meet all of them as you go through the interactive activity after the presentation.
Paige, can you hold the mic up a little closer?
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. So in addition to our core project team, we are complemented by a technical advisory committee, like a TAC for short. It's comprised of agencies and firms that are either affected by the project or have a stake in it, or also bring technical expertise in the arena of levee projects. And so this group has been together and working on this project since the inception. We meet quarterly, but interact more frequently than that. They've been reviewing everything that we develop and design and the public outreach. So we are very blessed to have a large technical advisory committee that brings a lot of experience, expertise, and local knowledge to this project. So I'm just gonna do a quick overview of this presentation, just so you have an idea of what to expect and then what the rest of the night will look like. So we'll introduce the project. Then we're gonna dive into 4 kind of technical aspects of the project and the different expertises will be spoken to by the consultant team. Then I will give you, we'll get an overview of the interactive event that we're gonna have after this for the folks who are in person. We'll talk about next steps for the project, and then we will do an open Q&A session. So those in person and online will be able to ask questions and hear responses from the project team. All right, so digging right into the project. So as Councilmember G mentioned, this project started when FEMA notified the city that the levee system that currently protects Redwood Shores and the adjacent areas no longer meets their certification requirements. So we knew we were going to need to do a project to raise the levee system to the height that they now require. This team decided to take a multi-benefit approach to providing that flood protection. So you'll see the overall umbrella in that graphic is flood protection. That's the main goal of the project. But in providing flood protection, we also want to achieve a few other things at the same time and provide those multi-benefits for a few different reasons we'll talk about later. But those would be ecological enhancements, public access improvements, and placemaking opportunities. So for the project schedule, you can see we're right at that dark blue arrow right now. So we're getting to a 60% design for the project design, and that's due to FEMA in June of this year. So our team is working really quickly to get to that milestone. And you'll see at the bottom, we do anticipate community engagement throughout the entire project. So we really see this as the first of many meetings we'll have. Engaging with all of you and getting everyone's feedback, making sure you're a partner in the production and delivery of the project. I did want to add one small note, and I think Patrick wanted to speak to this. The subsequent phases that we have outlined there in the blue to green arrows are subject to available funding, and I'll hand it over to Patrick really quickly.
Thank you. And sorry, I should acknowledge I was gonna jump in on this slide. I did want to acknowledge the funding component of this, because as folks are going through the design, I think people in the back of their mind who understand how expensive utilities and infrastructure can be. And so what I want to do is take the question from the team kind of up front, to basically say, as one of my first things as city managers, to really sit down with staff, the community and partners, and then work with the council to really lay out a funding strategy, not just for this infrastructure, but for all infrastructure through the city. And so I just wanted to kind of tee that up early, that there hasn't been any planning on the funding side. But sometimes we've done meetings where people really focus on the funding part. Tonight, really all about the design. So we have a ton of work to do. Just what I wanted to acknowledge and whatnot. So there'll be more information on that. So thank you.
Does that mean there's no funding?
Right. Well, there's funding to design. Gotta figure out the gap.
Yeah, so we have funding right now through 2 parts, through a FEMA grant and then through a city match of the grant fund. So that's that dark blue phase right now that we're in for design. And hence why we see our FEMA deliverable to get them that design in June of this year. Right. Since it seems like mostly locals in person and potentially online, this map is probably pretty familiar to you, but we wanted to highlight, what is at risk if this project doesn't take place. And as all of you know, there's a lot of schools, daycares, critical community facilities like the Silicon Valley Clean Water Treatment Plant, which provides wastewater treatment for not just Redwood City, but St. Carlos, Belmont, portions of Menlo Park, Atherton, and Woodside. There's a St. Trans bus depot that's a crucial part of their bus operations on the whole peninsula. And then there's just other amenities that are really important, such as the office campuses, commercial centers, and protecting these critical assets is important, not just for Redwood City, but for the greater peninsula region as a whole. So public engagement, we really see, as I mentioned before, public engagement as a huge part of this project and a thread that's going to carry through the entire time. The project, when we started later last year, our first public outreach goal was to build project awareness. And so we did that through building a website, through creating a mailing list for folks who are interested in the project, sending out a mailer about the survey and the project, putting up signs. And so making that awareness known about the project. And then the phase we're in now for outreach is getting feedback on the alternatives our design team has identified. So while the outreach was going on, our design team has been doing a lot of background work, doing investigations out at the site, looking at past plans and maps, looking at different projections, and coming up with some feasible alternatives that also capture input we got from a public survey. So these series of meetings we're having over the next few weeks, and it'll culminate in a city council meeting in a couple weeks, are to get feedback on the alternatives we've identified, hear from the folks who are most, the biggest users of this system, and get a good understanding of which alternatives are the most desired and match the community's needs most closely. So just touching on the survey, for those of you who live here, you probably got this mailer in the mail with a little QR code to scan it and take our survey. 80% of the 480 plus respondents were Redwood Shores residents. 90% walk, run, or hike on the trails, and 69% use them pretty much weekly. So these are really well loved and used trail system. Most folks are really happy with it as it is. They like the scenic beauty, natural environment. They want to see nature-based solutions for how the project is designed. And the amenities people were most interested in seeing as part of this project was seating, shade structures, trash cans, and water access points. So you'll see in the subsequent presentation of alternatives, we captured that feedback in the alternatives we're presenting. So with that, I will dig into the first technical topic, which is about coastal flood protection. So if you remember that graphic from the beginning, kind of the umbrella goal of the project, which is to achieve flood protection. So I'll kind of give a little talk about the why and then pass it over to the civil engineering team to talk to the different alternatives they've identified there. So this is a graphic showing the existing levee system as it sits today. As we discussed earlier, FEMA currently does not certify the levee system that is protecting Redwood Shores right now. And what that means is FEMA then would designate this area as non-flood zone X. Flood zone X is really great for a couple of reasons. The most important is that you don't have to get flood insurance for your home if you have a mortgage. There are other benefits of being in flood zone X, such as having less stringent building requirements and having greater level of flood protection. So from a FEMA perspective, it's really important we keep this levee system certified. This is a photo showing from the king tides that we just saw a few weeks ago. So I think the other side of the project need comes from a sea level rise perspective. So while FEMA doesn't accredit the system, we also don't have a system that's going to be resilient to sea level rise. So right now, when there's the king tides, we're seeing overtopping in maybe a couple locations along the levee. By 2050, that would be happening in many different areas during those high tide events. And by 2100, overtopping is going to happen daily. So with the current projections for sea level rise, that's what we anticipate if we didn't touch the system as it sits right now. So really critical from a sea level rise perspective to raise that system. And with that, I will pass it over to Caitlin with Shopping Wheeler to talk through the alternatives of how we should adopt this system.
Thanks again. My name is Caitlin Clark. I'm with Shopping Wheeler Civil Engineers. Paige explained what the project's flood protection needs are, and I'm going to try to describe how the project plans to adapt those needs. So you see 3 different flood protection facilities here, configuration. All 3 will be evaluated along the shoreline. There's different layouts and constraints along that shoreline. More constrained, wider areas. So just a general picture of the 3 different configurations we'll be looking at. One of the questions the team has been evaluating is to what minimum height we should build the levees to. So the team has arrived at 2 different adaptation pathways. The first adaptation pathway, shown in green at the top, is the team's recommendation, which is a phased approach. So the current project would build to the FEMA required accreditation elevation plus 1 foot. The project would be designed to be adapted to a future additional increase in elevation. This path we're referring to as FEMA plus 1. So that second project would be completed within the century to meet the sea level rise predictions at that time, as well as FEMA accreditation and building code standards at that time. The second adaptation pathway, which we show in the light blue, that's the build it higher now concept. We're calling it FEMA plus 3.5. That's where you build to the FEMA accreditation elevation now and add 3.5 feet to that. So both approaches will provide end of century 2100 flood protection as well as end of century FEMA accreditation, just in two different approaches. So to contextualize those elevations, these attempt to show us what those FEMA elevations are relative to existing shorelines. So on the left, this is our FEMA +1, that first adaptation pathway. So FEMA accreditation elevation. So we need to build to what is an elevation 12.3 for FEMA to accredit the system now. So we'd add a foot to that. So current shoreline elevations are between 10 and 11 feet, just out here. It's about 10 feet. So we would need to add about 3.5 feet to existing shoreline elevations for this first scenario. The second one, FEMA 3.5. So we'd also be meeting the 12.3 FEMA accreditation requirement. We would be meeting that predicted protection to the predicted 2100 elevation, but also providing FEMA accreditation at the year 2100. So that would add about 6 feet to the current shoreline elevation on average. These are cross sections of that first approach, FEMA +1. So what we would do is, you see at the top cross section here, where we have space, we would place fill to that elevation 13.5. That's our FEMA +1 elevation. And that's in dark gray. And we build it wide enough and big enough so that one day we can come back and build it higher. You'll see elevation 16 is shown here. One of the benefits to this approach, to that future additional project, is that that is based on current predictions of sea level rise. If we build a second project in the future, we can build it to the elevation that FEMA and the sea level rise predictions are at that time, instead of guessing it now or predicting it now. The second, also FEMA +1 scenario, is there are areas where the shoreline is constrained in space. So we've got all your houses on one side and a beautiful margin on the other. And we will need to place fill as high as we can, so 13.5. And then in the future, we would come back and add a wall. So the benefits. So benefits of FEMA +1, this phased approach. It's going to minimize the amount and height of the flood walls needed along the shoreline now. So less than 50% of the total project length that Paige showed, the perimeter of Rebel Shores, would include a wall. It'd be less costly in the near term. Estimates are rough order of magnitude there, of 200 million. It allows for the uncertainty of future climate and sea level rise projections because it creates this opportunity to adapt as more data and information becomes available. The drawbacks, it would require additional construction projects within the century. This is the build higher now, FEMA +3.5 in cross section. So you'll see on the top half where we have space, we could build with fill up to the current the predicted elevation of 16 feet. And then where we're constrained in space, we would be building earth and fill, and then we'd be placing a wall up to 16. Note that for all of these conditions, when I say wall, we are talking no more than 3.5 feet tall. So the benefits of this build it higher now, you would get higher level and duration of flood protection in one project. Drawbacks. So you're going to need more and higher flood walls that won't be necessary in the near term, and they'll need to be maintained over their life. More than 50% of the project length would need to include a wall based on the space constraints that we have. It would be more costly in the near term, at least 25% more is our current estimate. It's more complex for the engineering and construction. It's longer construction impacts to the residents. And this is generally a more rigid approach in that it uses all these less certain projections in order to make decisions. And it's not just projections in sea level rise, it's also projections in what FEMA will consider accreditation in the future, as well as what building code standards would be in the future. So that.
So just to close out the flood protection system, some questions for you to think about. Are you supportive of a phased approach that provides protection to the current FEMA +1 criteria and adapts to provide additional protection in the future? Or would you prefer that the project provides protection to FEMA +3.5, even if that means more walled structure and more costly in the near term? So just something to think about, and that would be part of the interactive activity after this. And with that, I will pass it to Lauren.
Thank you, Paige. So my name is Lauren Bergenholtz. I'm with CMG Landscape Architecture, and I'm going to speak to the three projects that are nested within this flood protection agenda. So starting with public access. We all know this is a really well-loved and well-used trail system, over 7.5 miles of trail. And that the residents here at Redwood Shores walk, hike, run, bike, bird watch. It's a really kind of integral part of, I think, all of your daily lives. And so we want to make sure as we're adapting that we're maintaining those uses into the future. We also know that the current trail system doesn't necessarily meet Bay Trail design guidelines. Seating and shade are rare, trails are unpaved in many areas, parts of the shoreline are not publicly accessible, and some parts of the existing trail are paved, but narrow. So as we're thinking about how we can adapt to this system, we want to start with protecting and maintaining existing public access to the shoreline. So not just adapting the trail itself, but making sure that those access points are all adapted to. We also want to close existing gaps in Bay Trail. We want to identify opportunities to create new public shoreline access points for locals and visitors, while also balancing habitat protection. We also want to meet current Bay Trail design guidelines and provide an improved experience for all user groups. So to start the design process, we want to look at the existing trail system. So how are people actually getting to the trail? Where are their parking lots? Where do kind of local neighborhood and access points exist? And then our proposed adaptation approach is pretty simple. We have basically three categories. So the area shown in bright blue is where we're adapting the existing trail in place. So that means raising it to the specified elevation and then meeting those Bay Trail design guidelines. The areas shown in dark blue are where we will be building new Bay Trail. So we have two kind of big areas that will kind of add new shoreline access. So this area that starts by the Silicon Valley Clean Water Plant wraps around to the northeast, and then also going around the airport. We have a part of trail near the Redwood Life campus where we'll be moving the official Bay Trail inland. That's kind of off of the really exposed part of the existing levees there today. Just to give you a bit more of a sense of some of those Bay Trail design guidelines, a lot of them have to do with kind of providing safe use for multiple types of kind of modes of travel. And so in areas where we have kind of lower use, we could look at a narrower trail. In areas where we have higher use, we might want to consider a separated trail. So you could have kind of a bike path and kind of dedicated pedestrian area next to it. And I think this is something that we'd really like to get your feedback on. So some key questions for you all, and I think we'd love to hear feedback either in the question and answer session or at the stations after this presentation. So how do you access the trail today? Which areas of the trail do you use the most? And then do you have any concerns about current trail use that should be addressed in the project? And through the survey, we've already heard that bike pedestrian separation, speed regulation, trail maintenance, and drainage are really important. So I'm sure there's other issues that you all have noticed. So now I'm going to talk about placemaking and trail amenities. So this is really focused on the specific kind of features or elements that we might add to the trail to kind of improve your experience and use of these public open spaces. So we've heard that there's a number of things we would like to see, from seating and shade structures to maybe even public art or picnic areas. And we want to make sure that first and foremost, we're providing some improved trail amenities. So these could be really simple improvements. They could also be kind of bigger improvements potentially, depending on what we hear from you all. We also want to make sure that we're maintaining the natural character of the shoreline and the visual connection between the shoreline and the bay. So we already know that this place has a very kind of distinct identity. We want to make sure that what we're putting back, once the trail is adapted, is kind of appropriate to that character. Finally, we want to also identify opportunities to create new open space destinations with a wider range of amenities at key shoreline connection points. So a few considerations. I know when we're talking about a lot of this stuff, people's minds kind of immediately go to funding. How are we going to pay for all of this? So first thing to consider is that regulatory agencies such as BCD and BCDC do require public recreational amenities as part of their permitting process. So you have to do a certain kind of amount of public improvements to meet those requirements. Next, a broader range of grants are available to projects that take a multi-benefit approach to flood protection. So again, we don't know what the funding strategy is going to be, but working on kind of projects like this across the bay, we've seen there are more opportunities if you're able to kind of take this multi-benefit approach. Next, the final selection and design of amenities will be adjusted to the overall project budget. So today we're kind of providing the broadest kind of range of possibilities so we can hear from you all. Probably not everything's going to make it to the project, but this is kind of our starting point, kind of toolkit of options. And finally, the design team's coordinating with the city to address concerns over maintenance and management of any of these new amenities. So that's kind of baked into the process. So we've approached this design problem through this idea of amenity clusters. So that's basically taking this wide range of features and grouping them by potential uses. So we could have something like a trailside rest stop, or we could have something like a shoreline gathering space, which would be more like a park that would probably be larger and more diverse in terms of its amenities and improvements. Or we could have something simpler, more modest improvements. And we probably need a mix of things across the shoreline because there's different ways of kind of accessing and using these spaces. So to get into what some of those clusters kind of consist of. Our trailside rest stops would be just kind of these moments for seating and rest adjacent to the trail, a simple bench, a shade structure. These would likely be located more frequently along the trail. We could also have big trail bike nodes. So this is the idea of there being kind of dedicated rest stops for cyclists. They could have seating, maybe a bike repair station, wayfinding, maybe a drinking fountain. We also have this idea of a gateway. It's basically a trailhead. And so that's something, more an access point that would have dedicated wayfinding, maybe trash cans, potentially integrated interpretive features, and seating as well. Next, we have bay viewpoints. So these are located at scenic vistas and places of natural beauty, and they're really an opportunity to connect to the bay visually. We have a few sketches here of what that could look like, and I'm showing a range of how they could be designed. From kind of a simple bump out on the trail to more of a natural overlook that projects out kind of toward the bay, or something like this, what we call a get down, where you have a secondary path that would come off the levee and bring you slightly closer to the water's edge. Next, we have the neighborhood connector. So this is getting towards something that feels kind of more like a park. And the idea of the neighborhood connector is that it's really focused on kind of neighborhood, locally serving amenities. So it would be at kind of some of our existing kind of shoreline parks. It could include a small picnic area, an overlook, shade structure, seating, maybe a nature play feature. Again, kind of thinking about sort of a smaller, simple kind of park. The shoreline gathering space is kind of similar to a neighborhood connector, but amping up the scale a little bit with the eye towards creating more of a regional destination. So these would be located near parking and could have kind of this larger scale of amenities. So medium picnic area, maybe a larger overlook, potentially water access, seating, bike parking, that kind of thing. So again, we really think the existing open space network is the starting point for thinking about where to best locate these features. And so we really hope to hear from you all about what you think would be the best fit. And we've taken our first pass at locating some of these things, and we've designed an interactive activity to get your feedback. So you can come over to this station and let us know where you think these things should go. All right, final component, landscape and ecological enhancements. And this I think is really foundational to the project. This is such a unique context in terms of kind of Redwood Shores existing adjacent to so many beautiful kind of intact tidal wetlands. And so we really want to make sure that first and foremost, we're protecting habitat and minimizing construction impacts. We also want to improve habitat function via native planting on all levee slopes. We want to identify opportunities to enhance native ecologies within the marsh transition zone. We also want to expand marsh habitat where feasible and explore opportunities to improve inland habitat and transition horticultural landscapes to native planting wherever possible. Our starting point for this is really thinking about this existing native tidal upland transition. So what plants are kind of part of those communities and how can we use that knowledge to improve habitat function into the future? Starting with our planting approach, and this really can happen anywhere there's construction disturbance as part of the levee project. But what we're putting back is kind of consistent with what is appropriate from these native plant communities. So thinking about the elevation ranges and then coordinating that with what makes the most sense. So from kind of coastal scrub plant communities to coastal meadow and high tidal marsh, where it makes sense. And this planting approach can support a lot of the native species that are already present here. From salt marsh harvest mouse to local birds and even aquatic species. When we're thinking about ecological enhancements outside of just planting, our big constraint is really space. How much space do we actually have available along the shoreline? In certain areas that are really constrained, we may need to just focus on that planting approach, that we don't really have space to do a lot more than that. In other areas where we have more space, maybe 100-foot shoreline, maybe even greater, we can look at opportunities to really expand existing marsh habitat, either through more modest improvements, like smaller levee setbacks, to maybe some bigger areas where we might even be able to do larger scale tidal marsh restoration. And we've called out some of those larger areas here. So we think that the basin by Redwood Life is an excellent opportunity for tidal marsh restoration. The radio tower site also might be a good opportunity. The kind of corner by Silicon Valley Clean Water, where there's a lot of erosion today, would be a great opportunity to implement a gravel beach and then some kind of inland wetland that could connect those two existing patches. So increasing habitat connectivity could be a big benefit of that work. The seasonal pond that's by Shore Dogs Park is another great opportunity. This kind of next approach is just looking at areas where we have what we would term a moderate amount of shoreline space. So again, thinking about those shorelines that are maybe 60 to 100 feet in width. And for all of these areas, we're looking at the feasibility of just moving that levee inland and then creating a marsh transition zone bayside of that new levee. And this cross section here shows you how that may work. So we see our existing levee location kind of located there in the light gray text. And then our proposed levee location, which is basically moving inland, maybe 60 feet or so. That new area in front of the levee would then be regraded, so it would be a very shallow slope and could be replanted with marsh vegetation. And as sea levels rise, that would kind of become more of a contiguous part of the existing marsh. And I think something important to note here is that through all of these proposals, we're making sure that we are not disturbing the existing marsh. So if construction is happening anywhere, we're always starting inland of that existing marsh. So, again, some key questions for you all. As we're moving forward, we know that you have kind of the best knowledge of this place. We really look to you to tell us, what areas do you want to preserve or protect? Where do you see opportunities for habitat expansion? And please let us know if there's anything else, that we really need to know so we can best adapt and preserve this amazing landscape. Thank you, Lauren and Paige and Aiden. So we're gonna have a Q&A session for about the next 20 minutes, and then there's an opportunity to break out into the boards that you see around us. So there's a station for each of the subject matter that you just heard about. There's the coastal flood protection station, which is behind you there. There's the public access station, which is behind the sign-in table. The landscape and ecological enhancements is over here, and then that placemaking and amenities station is here, where there's an activity where you can use stickers to help us understand where you'd like to see certain things. Next. So you've heard a lot about the what today, and I know you have many questions probably about the how. And as we heard earlier, construction and implementation information is still forthcoming, but there's members of the city team here that can answer any questions you have about that. And then as a reminder about our upcoming events today, we're here at this community meeting on February 4th, next Wednesday, is the Redwood Shores annual Community Association annual meeting, and we'll be tabling there. So maybe see some of you there, or if you have neighbors that couldn't make it tonight, let them know we'll be there. And then there's one more community meeting on Saturday, February 7th. And as always, you can contact the project team with any questions at the project email listed there. There's also a brochure. Don't have to write it down if you can't see that quite clearly, but there's a brochure at the sign-in table that has that information. And there's a project webpage where we've uploaded this presentation as well as digital versions of all the boards from today, so you can review those at your leisure. And with that, I will open it up for Q&A. We do have, I think, over 40 people here on Zoom with us, so we're going to be alternating between in-person questions and Zoom questions. But happy to take your questions now, questions or comments.
Hi, first of all, thank you very much. You guys really look like you're just amazing work on this. So applause for all of you. You didn't mention the airport. Remember that the last time the levies were raised, they had to do something that was some kind of inflatable structure or something like that. Can you speak to that? Thanks.
Thank you so much. So just for those online, so in case you didn't get to hear the question was about what is our proposed plan around the San Carlos Airport. I'll pass it over to Caitlin and Sean.
Yes, you're right. So due to FAA flight paths, they were unable to raise the levee with fill like they did around the rest of Redwood Shores within that section. They don't have sufficient clear area around the existing airport runway. Our proposal in conjunction with the airport is to expand the levee bayside to provide that clear area. So the airport would get their safety area and clear flight path, and we will get a bay trail, which is a compromise and I think a great one. So that's the current plan, subject to remediations and all the fun stuff, but that is the current plan.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you to the city for making this available for everyone. Just a quick question on the phased approach, right? It looks like it's maybe a 10-year project that executed, and then you're covered with FEMA until 2060, so that means you got to be right about 15 years before you have to do it again.
And just to repeat the question for those online, the question is what is the current with a phased approach to the FEMA +1? What is the timeline to get that project implemented, and then how long would we be protected for? So again, pending that all funding falls into place as we hope it will, that would mean construction completed 2034. So we'd be protected for about 26 years, at least with current FEMA accreditation standards. And then closer to that time frame, we would need to do a smaller adaptation project. And again, the intent there is to design the lower levee system to be able to hold a larger project, so there wouldn't be rework. It would really just be adding on to it, hence the adaptable strategy.
Okay, so you don't think it would take 10 years to do the second thing.
Right now, we're estimating the construction timeframe to be 4 years.
Got it.
Yeah, and the permitting and design is about 4 more.
Thank you.
From here on. Yeah.
I'm gonna take a Zoom question now. Okay, so we have a question somewhat related. Does this mean we won't meet the FEMA requirements until 2030?
So great question. So yes, currently the levy system does not meet the requirements, and until we are completely constructed and certified by FEMA, we would still be in that scenario. So with the current timeline we have identified, that would not be until 2034 that we would be meeting FEMA's accreditation standards.
And Suzanne asks, are you considering a horizontal levee like the one in Palo Alto, especially the levee on the side facing Redwood City?
So great question as well. I can speak to it a little bit and then I might pass it off to our design team. When we are considering, I think one of the first slides in the flood protection was kind of, there's, a few different options of how you can provide flood protection. A fully horizontal levee is one of them, a hybrid combo of a levee with a wall, or a larger, taller wall of a much smaller levee. So we're evaluating all of those options. As you guys know, this is a super unique shoreline. There's locations where we have lots of space, and our goal as a project is to provide horizontal levees as frequently as we can. And then there's locations like the airport where it's gonna be very, very tight. We're even having to add fill just to get to the height you need to get to. So it'll be different in every application. The 2 different elevations we talked about, FEMA +1 and FEMA +3.5, do change that. So the FEMA +3.5 will be more wall, so less opportunity for horizontal levees. Let me know if I missed anything. Okay.
I'm back to it.
Sure.
Specifically about Palo Alto's horizontal levee. That's a pilot study they're doing. It's not only just about a nice tidal marsh transition levee, but about wastewater polishing from their treatment plant. So we have been in coordination with our treatment plant in discussions about whether they would consider that type of application for their wastewater polishing across the horizontal levee adjacent to their plant. Getting a little technical, but they have discharge permit for a deep water discharge. This would be a surface discharge. So that would change their whole permitting system, and they already have all their wastewater polishing program in place. So they're not currently looking to implement something like that. It would be too burdensome without benefit.
Yeah, just to go on that a bit more, there isn't the same level of development around that treatment plant as there is here. So I think taking a lot of different factors into consideration of why the application might not make as much sense in shores.
Hello. The economy's working, yeah, it's working.
Yeah.
So, thanks for all the work you guys have done, and the presentation's quite lovely. I'm curious about. So there was a slide earlier on that showed, the Bay Trail going all the way up and around Redwood Shores, kind of the way that the trail used to be before they did the current iteration of it. Is there any consideration for improvements that don't necessarily go all the way around the sewer plant and don't necessarily go all the way around the airport? Like basically the way the Bay Trail is now, it's kind of connected between different things. But it doesn't go all the way around the sewer plant, it doesn't go all the way around the airport. Is that something that, is that in there because it has to be done for sea level rise anyways? Or is there a way to do it without having to construct new sections of Bay Trail in places where they haven't been for a long time?
And sure, is there, do you have a concern with the expanded Bay Trail? With the they're proposed?
Just cost. Really, it's like, do we need to do it? Do we need to do it out there? And if we didn't do it, would it cost us?
Sure, so for those online, just to repeat the question, it's for the locations that we're looking to connect to Bay Trail where there's gaps right now. Is that required for any reason by this, by regulatory agencies or otherwise for this project, or is that just something the project is proposing to get that Bay Trail connectivity? Let me know, do you want to take that? Or you want to? Sure.
We are just about to engage with most agencies, so I can't speak to what they will require. We are in both of those locations, we do need to raise a levee. So we will be touching it and working with the levee out of the nose as well as the airport. So we are proposing that we should extend the main trail. We're gonna see what the agencies say. We'd love to hear what you have to say. It is not a requirement as of now, no.
Could you explain what a horizontal levee is? Because we've had a couple people just ask, since you're using that terminology.
Yeah, a horizontal levee, it's used in a lot of different ways. It's used one in the way I just described in wastewater treatment plants to discharge, effluent, discharge from the wastewater treatment plant to clean it at the very last minute before it goes into the bay. But it's used also, for wave, protection. So when you have an earthen levee, instead of being sharp and steep, it's nice and long and flat as it goes into the bay. And what that allows is for any waves to come up, it breaks on this nice, gentle slope. In Redwood Shores, we have this beautiful tidal marsh surrounding nearly the whole levee system. So from a wave protection standpoint, we already have it. So what we're proposing, or what we're looking to integrate with the project that Lauren described, was that hopefully we can set back in certain areas, where we have space, we set back the levee, then we can provide a more gentle slope. So as sea level rises, that marsh can then transition interior. So yeah, it's big, long, gentle slope.
Thank you. I'm coming to you next, but I'm gonna take some Zoom questions. Aaron says, for the phased approach, what would be the trigger for determining when to build phase two? Could the second phase accommodate even more extreme sea level rise predictions?
So again, great question. Yes, with the phased approach, it'd be a combo of things. So we'd be keeping an eye on what sea level rise projections are in that time frame, kind of ahead of when we would anticipate that FEMA would request a change to the system to meet accreditation standards. And so if those are drastically changing beyond what we're seeing today, in the sense of, flood protection being more critical earlier, we'd look to do that project when that was needed. If they kind of follow what they have been or get, less ominous, I would say, then we'd be keeping that in mind. Again, our prediction of the 2060 FEMA accreditation timeframe is assuming FEMA's accreditation requirements kind of hold as is, which would be awesome if it happens, and we're just all gonna hope for that. But if they do change one way or the other, that could change that timeline a bit. But yeah, the long story short of it is our project team would be kind of keeping an eye on those changes as they take place, and then figuring out when the next project should happen. And the nice thing with the adaptable approach is it might be that it's not 16 feet, it's 15 feet that we need to go to and get that level of protection. But if it is more, then we didn't build something and have to build even more beyond that, we would be doing an adaptable project, second phase at that time.
I have a question about groundwater. It's now understood that as sea level rises, it'll push the groundwater table up. And on the East Coast, a lot of low-lying areas are flooding from the groundwater, not from the tidal action. Is there any concern, even though we raised the levee, that inland from the levee will have groundwater rising? And does FEMA have anything to say about this?
Sure, I will, for the folks online, the question is about, how is groundwater playing into this and playing into the design for this project, and what is FEMA's stance on groundwater impact? I'll pass off to Caitlin.
Well, if you really have questions, you can talk to Matt from ESA in the back, all about it, but in short, I'll respond for him here. So as part of the study, in order to get FEMA accreditation, we do have to do what's called interior drainage study. So we have to make sure that the inside of the levee system, where all the homes are, doesn't flood based on local rainwater and groundwater. So groundwater, as it rises, so I can step back. All of the stormwater from Redwood Shores goes into the lagoon and then it's pumped into the bay. And this is actually very beneficial because you already have a system in place to deal with that. So the pipes are already below groundwater elevation, the storm drain pipes in the ground. They're already dealing with groundwater as it's pouring in. As those groundwater levels rise, you'll need to pump more. So we are doing a study, analysis, and that will be part of the project.
Thanks, Stephen. We have two questions about ground squirrels. So the levee currently faces a much more near-term threat, massive destruction by tunneling ground squirrels. Up and down the levees, there's many holes, tunnels, etc. What is being done about this issue? And is that being taken into consideration?
All right, I will, if he's willing, Terrence, our public works director, I will let him speak to this very exciting.
All right, thank you. So, Terrence Jordan right now, Public Works Services Department. So, this earthen levees come with the predators. So that some of those are naturally occurring, so the ground squirrel and then barrel of different species that live in the levee that we manage as much as possible. And the best humanely as possible as well. So most of the time we try to plug up their holes and make sure that they don't re-nest it again. This is the whole approach that we've been doing it, and so far it worked. But we really appreciate the notification from the community. The biggest time that biggest thing that we can rely on is notification, because people notify what is happening because you guys walk, bike, run on that trail. You know exactly more than we do, because we don't have a manpower to check on the levee every day. But as soon as we get the notification, we'll be there to address the issue.
Is it related to the ground squirrels? Okay, I'm gonna take one more. I'm gonna take one more. Okay, Linda says, in addition to signs, structures, or benches, she wants to make sure that those are placed carefully so they're not an eyesore for the perspective of the folks in their homes near the levee. For example, if signs were placed on tall poles on the levee near the fire station, in the past they've rusted, been broken, never been fixed. So will those kinds of concerns be taken into consideration? Yes, definitely. Yeah, and again, we really are at this really early stage in the design process, so we're just figuring out the features that you all want to see. And once we kind of have that set of features, we'll figure out how to design them in a site-specific way. And we'll work with the city to ensure that the maintenance is kind of appropriately accounted for in the design and placement. You did get a question. I'm just going to read a comment here. At the most popular entry points, please add cigarette butt receptacles and trash and recycling bins. I'm amazed at how much trash we leave. Please also add poop bag dispensers. Valid, very well.
Thank you. Thank you. I've seen this presentation before, and thank you for doing this community meeting. Very much appreciated. I have a more general question, which is two questions. One question is, the BCDC has passed the Regional Shoreline Adaptation Plan, the RSAP, as they call it. And it's our understanding that whatever we decide to do in Redwood Shores will also have to meet the RSAP, the Regional Shoreline Adaptation Plan. Because we're going ahead on Redwood Shores a little bit ahead of the rest of Redwood City, which is following maybe 6 months or so. So my question is this plan going to specifically meet BCDC's checklist of nature-based adaptation, toxic investigations? So that's one question. The second question is, it's my understanding and my observation during king tides that the Marine Parkway connection with 101 is very vulnerable to flooding. And I saw that the water was almost going over the roadway because there's not enough capacity for Belmont Slough to go underneath the roadways to get to the slough. So is there some part, I didn't see in your presentation any specific attention to Marine Parkway and 101 flooding. Is that part of this project also? Paige?
So very good questions, just for those online, it's kind of a two-part question, and I think we might have two different consultants answer each one of those. All take a stab just at a higher level from the city's perspective. So she mentioned the Regional Shoreline Adaptation Plan, and is this project going to be compliant with the requirements of that? And so the city is required to have a Regional Shoreline Adaptation Plan. The due date of that, I believe if I'm correct, is 2034. Correct me if I'm wrong, Terrence. So this project clearly needs to happen ahead of that, so, in a perfect world, that would identify what projects need to be done to adapt our shoreline, and then we execute on them. But this is just too critical to get going, and so we're moving this one ahead. But the folks at the city who are working on our regional shoreline adaptation plan are a core part of this project team, working really closely with us. So we're making sure that the plan they create and what we're doing on this project are both aligned with BCDC's requirements and framework. The second part of your question about the flooding that's happening 101. I think in the technical advisory committee slide, we did show Belmont, City of Belmont is a key project partner here. And also Caltrans is part of our technical advisory committee. So we coordinated closely with both of them on this project. I'll let Caitlin speak a bit more about the flooding there and what the project has identified and will look for in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're looking at the Belmont Slough, Belmont Creek area closely, and part of this project is actually expanding the levee footprint or length rather, not footprint, to reach the southwest portion in Belmont along Belmont Creek. So essentially, we're gonna ring Belmont Creek levee, and then the levee on the north side along Oracle, it's going to continue onto the Audubon property. And by doing that, we'll also have to eventually, not at 60%, eventually a structural analysis of the culvert underneath Marine Parkway to make sure that it can handle this. But we are basically going to prevent water from spilling on the Marine Parkway by blocking it off both on the creek side and the bay side with levees. So I can show you in detail what I mean on the map there, and you like to discuss, it's a little hard to just verbally say it, but we are considering it, sure.
Thanks. We have a lot of great questions coming in from Zoom. Would we need to get flood insurance until the time we meet FEMA accreditation?
Yes, so I think Councilmember G mentioned this at the very beginning of the meeting, but right now this area is in what's called a seclusion zone. And so what that means is while FEMA has de-accredited the levee system, they do know we are working on this project. We have a FEMA grant to do the design phase that we're in right now. And so they're putting this area in what's called seclusion, so flood insurance is not required. But with the understanding that the system does not meet current requirements. So we're kind of in this, little middle gray area. And then once the project is completed and re-accredited, you go back into flood zones.
Thank you. We have two questions kind of asking the same thing. Do you have priority areas, given the potential cost of the project and likelihood you can't do everything? Are there places you would prioritize for nature-based solutions or amenities improvements?
Good question. I'll pass off to Lauren, but just so everyone knows in general, we do have to raise the entire levee system. So we couldn't, not do a portion by the airport or not do a portion somewhere else. It's one whole system that protects the area. So we do have to touch almost every part of the levee system. Some are at a height that's acceptable. But we will have to touch every part of the levee system and get it all to the correct height. With that, speaking more about amenities and stuff, I'll pass it to Lauren.
So in terms of amenities and priorities for improvement, I think that's what we're really looking to you all to help direct us on, where you think those improvements would be the most valuable, most used, and most needed. Looking at the trail today, I think there is a little bit of an imbalance that, the north side that was more recently developed tends to have some newer public park features, trail that's paved and slightly better quality. The other side is lacking in a lot of those features. So I think that's definitely something to consider. What's there today and how are those amenities distributed? In terms of ecological improvements, I think a lot of that will come down to feasibility when we get into kind of the next phase of design and study. So what's feasible from a geotechnical perspective, what's feasible in terms of infrastructure that's there today, what will really deliver the most bang for our buck in terms of the habitat benefit. So I think still early on in the process.
I'm going to take two more questions from Zoom and two more from the audience, and then we're going to break for the stations where you can ask many more questions. So on Zoom, Chu says, many homes are adjacent to the existing levee with existing landscaping between their fence and levee. Are you able to design the new levee without impacting those areas?
Do you want to take this one? We'll do stab it. In general, the first thing we have to look at is flood protection. So we want to make sure you guys are all safe from flood protection, that FEMA accredits your system, and that we're protecting you from sea level rise. The second aspect of this is, you know, as we mentioned, we really want folks' input here, and if there's anything that you see and you go, oh my gosh, no way, please don't do that, we wanna know. So this is your opportunity, the future meetings and throughout this project duration, is the opportunity to give us that input. Getting more into details, I can, is there anything else you wanna add to that?
I mean, I think just that, you know, looking at the existing shoreline, the amount of space between kind of that existing marsh edge. And kind of the inland property lines where they exist. It varies so much, you know, there's areas where it's as tight as 50 feet. And in those cases, I think we're gonna have to go right up, you know, to the property lines. And in other cases, we have more space and there'll be more of a buffer zone. So there's not kind of one answer to, you know, what will happen all the way around the levee, but I think pretty soon we'll have kind of a clear idea of that and envelope in which construction will need to occur.
Hi, Megan. So, first of all, very much appreciated that you guys are having this open, Q&A. We've, as a community, we've been corralled into different city voting things before, which have had various outcomes. That's just one statement. The question is, with the phased approach, if you do the phased approach, is doing phase one then lock in the design for phase two? Or are there options to change our minds about how we want things in the future? Like, that's the question.
Sure, so for those online, the question is, with the phased approach or the FEMA +1 alternative, does that lock in a certain design style for the phase two? Or does that give us flexibility? So I think I'll comment in generally and let people correct me if I'm saying anything wrong, but it does give us a more adaptable option, so we're able to kind of adapt that system to what works in the future. We'd be a bit more locked in with the higher tech because we're choosing a certain type of design and then having to construct with that and maybe having to do rework if we ever had to go back and change the projections change. The reality though.
Share the walls, the vertical wall, does this ensure the vertical wall would be put in phase two?
Yeah, I was gonna say, so likely phase two in most locations would be adding a wall to probably an earthen line. Let me know if that's a fair characterization. Okay, I'll let Caleb speak.
So, put a number to it, if based on space alone, if we're going to elevation 16, 60% of the alignment would need some height of wall up to 3.5 feet. So, when we're talking about doing the adaptation approach, 40% would need some amount of wall. I will say in general, those walls are located around the airport and around the nose where we have wave action. So that's generally the locations. But speaking to whether it locks us in place to using a wall in the future, we would make it as flexible as possible. Still again, 40% of the areas would just have additional fill placed on, is the plan. 60% would have more wall on it. So it really depends. I think we're not at this point in design, but we'll design it to be as flexible as possible in the future. But within a few feet, it's gonna lock you in due to some heavy geotechnical considerations that I'd love to talk to you about if you'd like.
Okay, you're gonna be our last question in person. Greg says, are there restrictions preventing designing bay access points for non-powered water vehicles like canoes, kayaks, paddleboards? Is this a possibility?
Great question. Do you want to take that or is that a mass?
So we've just had preliminary conversations relative to kind of BCDC permitting requirements, and I think they would actually be very pleased to see more water access. Our kind of main concern with water access right now is really the kind of bathymetry. So where do we have these super wide like mud flats? Where with kind of the tidal patterns that exist today, would you actually be able to have water access? So I think that's really the limiting factor. But again, I think that's something that, you know, you all kind of know this area best. You should let us know if you think that you actually have an area that you think would make sense, because it is something that I think could be very valuable. We know that people kind of use Steinberger Slough for kayaking and for stand-up paddleboarding. And so if we could increase that access from the Redwood Shore side, that would be a big benefit, I think.
Laura.
Thank you.
Two questions. One is funding, because it sounded like you just have funding for what you've done now and there's no funding. And the second question is, a lot of people said, I agree, I just love going out there because it is so natural and nature. And I'm looking at the amenities and it's amenities, and it's like all the way around the thing, and you have places, you know, I go off and go to the playgrounds. So do we have to have a ton of amenities, or can we keep it more natural? I don't know what other people feel, do you wanna, make all these structures? I mean, I like garbage cans and, maybe the cigarette butt things, but, it just seems like all those amenities that your pictures on there, and I look at Foster City and I'm going, not that many people really use them. So, and I've looked at, we've gone across those boardwalks, to walkways that go and look out. And I don't know how many people use them. We used them once to go see what they were, and that was about it. But maybe people go up there all the time. I don't know. So why build all these structures and, and then you take away the nature?
Sure, so just to repeat for those online, it's two questions. One is related to future funding for the project once we get beyond this FEMA grant city match phase. And then the second is about the amenities that the project may or may not include. There is an answer to both of your questions a little bit, and I think Laura touched on it in her presentation. So there are a lot of grant opportunities where if you are providing recreational opportunities or enhancing community recreation benefits, then you are an applicant, a more strong applicant for that grant. So, how many amenities that has to be, what those look like, that's what is totally up in the air right now. It's something that this meeting is a great opportunity to tell us what you would actually use. Our survey that would similar questions were posed, where are you using the trail now? What would you like to see out there? What do you like that's out there? What could improve? So all of those things are things our team wants to know, because it is our 100% goal to only identify amenities that the community does want out there. And so again, with the funding piece of it, there are a lot of grants that if you are providing recreational amenities, you are eligible for a grant you might not otherwise be eligible for. So as we look at how to fund it, that's a big piece of it. I'll point to Patrick if he has any other comments he'd want to speak to about funding.
I gotta check a beat. So, now, it is a great question, and what a lot of jurisdictions do is they'll try to wait until they have the money before they design. What we're doing is we understand the need is trying to design to get it what we would call shovel ready, so then we can go out and fundraise for the project. So, like anything that we do, it'll take multiple sources, multiple partners. But when you look at breaking ground, and I can't remember the year. In bureaucrat years, that's not that far away. So we're on the clock. We got to figure that out. So some more information to come. We're taking donations.
Thank you. So I'm gonna end the Q&A because I do want to allow time for the breakout sessions, and we have a lot of project team members here who are eager to talk to you. There were a few comments and questions on the Zoom chat that we didn't get to, but we'll be doing a summary of the feedback and the questions we heard today, and anything that we didn't get to, we'll answer in that summary, which will be posted publicly on the webpage. And as I said, these digital versions of these boards and the presentation are also available on the project webpage currently. Abraham just dropped the link to that in the Zoom chat for those of you there. And so we're going to say goodbye to our Zoom neighbors and friends because they're done with this portion, and then we're going to break for the boards. I do have to say that we have to be out of this room by 7:30, so we will be cutting it and asking you to leave at 7:30 so we can clean up. All right, with that, thank you so much for being here, and look forward to talking to you at the boards.